All right. Good evening, everyone. I'm Fatima coming to you from Santa Clarita Public Library. Thank you all for joining us for History Talks. The topic of discussion tonight is holiday traditions in history. Just a reminder, if you have any questions for our panel, please type them into the Facebook chat box and I will relay it to our authors. Before we begin, I would like to provide a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land the Santa Clarita Libraries are built on is the traditional territory of the Fernandeño Tataviam people. As we begin this history talk, it is important to acknowledge and honor their history and their ancestral grounds. We encourage you to research and discover the history of the indigenous peoples whose land you are joining this program from virtually. You can find out more information about the many tribelet units who are the Fernandeño Tataviam Band of Mission Indians and their histories at the website I will put in the chat. I will also include a link to the History Talks website where you can learn more about the authors with us tonight. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Janet.
Thank you so much. It is a real pleasure to be here. This is holiday traditions take two, since we've done this before, and now we actually it was a favorite, and we are back to do it. The traditions, the events that come around annually, the events by which we measure time and relationships, the events that mark us. These traditions are important to us and they're enormous fun to examine. I'm not just talking Christmas traditions, even though that's the period that leaps to mind right around these times. We're going to go beyond that, and we have the perfect group to do it. We have Louise Bannon, who writes historical mysteries set in old California. Her latest is Death of the Chinese Field Hand, book 3 in her Los Angeles series. Anne will be taking us to the American West, as well as to more common people in the 17th century. So we'll be getting a little bit of that.
I get around, what can I say?
Exactly, we all seem to do that. Linda Mclaughlin, who writes historical and Regency romance. Her latest title is Lillian the Gambler. She also contributed a holiday story to an anthology, Sweetwater Springs Christmas by Deborah Holland and Friends. Linda is going to be taking us to the 19th century British Isles, and she may chime in with some American West as well. And we also have Zenobia Neal, who was named after an ancient warrior queen who fought against the Romans. A lifelong lover of Greco-Roman mythology, her latest title is Ariadne Unraveled. Zenobia is going to be taking us to the ancient world, a bunch of places in the ancient world, happily. And I'm Janet Wertman. I write fiction set in the Tudor era. I'll be your moderator, so I won't be talking quite as much, but I will jump in here and there for the things that tie together these different eras. With that, let's get started. Is this whole Christmas time thing the biggest holiday of the year in your books? And this one I'm going to kind of go for everyone. Let's go with Anne first.
Well, I haven't written a book yet that, the book behind me, Cloak and Dagger Routine, is actually set in the 1980s, and I don't like calling that historical because I wrote it in the 1980s. So, but yes, there are some very prominent Christmas scenes in it, hence the Christmas sweaters. But in the old Los Angeles series, I haven't hit Christmas yet, but it is a big holiday. We're in 1870s, in 1872. By that point, yeah, we've got ads in the newspaper touting gifts. We've got, grand Christmas balls, and oh, there's a skating masquerade and all sorts of fun things that are going on. So yeah, the Victorians in the 19th century, this is really when you begin to start finding a lot of the things that we recognize about Christmas specifically, at least among the American people. And I'm talking like us white American people. But, it was a big deal. Very, very big deal in that era. One of the reasons I was glad to start doing some more of the research on history is I think book 5 will take place at Christmas time. So that'll be fun. Yeah, I've just finished writing book 4, Death of an Heiress. I just finished my first draft with that. So we're letting that percolate for a little while, but book 5, hopefully in another year or two.
Okay, so your characters are dealing more with Christmas than you are, but how about you, Linda?
Well, yeah, for and I don't actually, other than the Christmas story in the anthology, I haven't really written a lot of holiday stories, but for my characters, yes, Christmas holiday of the year. And in England, originally, this holiday season lasted from December 6th, which is St. Nicholas Day, until January 6th, 12th night. But then once the Industrial Revolution came along, the season got shortened because the factory workers had to be back on the job as soon as possible. But in most European countries, Christmas was the big holiday of the year. Scotland was a notable exception. In fact, Christmas was banned in Scotland for nearly 400 years, thanks to the Presbyterian Church, who decided it was too Catholic. So New Year's Eve, or Hogmanay, became the big holiday in Scotland and is still very, very big there.
Okay, I know that about the Tudor times as well, that they would decorate the spinning wheels so that women would not be tempted to do any work during this period. And, I know they would decorate it. And now I'm turning to Zenobia, and that's kind of a trick question.
I have a tricky answer. So I'm going to actually be talking about two books tonight, and Ariadne Unraveled, which is backwards or forwards, I'm not sure, takes place about 4,000 years ago. So a little bit before there was a Christmas. However, Dionysus was born around the winter solstice, and he had a very mysterious birth. And he was born actually from his father Zeus's thigh. So there are some weird correlations there. So the celebration of Dionysus's birthday is a very ancient time, and it's the same time of year as Christmas, but there was no Christ to have a Christmas in any of my books.
Was that what Rome then did Saturnalia from?
Well, I mean, I can't say for sure, but one thing that really struck me as I researched and double checked facts for this panel is that there are so many similarities in New Year's celebrations and holidays that all have to do with marking the changing of the seasons. There are all these celebrations that have to do with either the darkness coming or the light coming, or bringing light into the darkness. So, I mean, I think that it's kind of like how they built temples, built churches on temples that were built on sacred sites. So it's kind of it's easier to add a holiday if there's already one there. And I think that the around the winter solstice is a time where people really want to come together and celebrate, because it's kind of scary. And so it's helpful to get together with your community with, fire and food to make you feel better about the days getting shorter.
And can I jump on this, Janet? Because this is wonderful. One of the reasons Christmas is Christmas specifically, that was something the Catholic Church did. I'm not sure exactly when. It could be as early as 4th or 5th century, but the bottom line was, when you read the gospel accounts, St. Luke's account specifically, that's the most detailed, that's the one we think of with the shepherds and everything. You look at that sort of thing didn't happen during the winter. It happened in the spring when they'd be out on the hills with their flocks. So this wasn't happening in the middle of the winter. It was something the church did later. And again, I don't know, I'm pretty sure it was before the year 1000. But a lot of the especially around the Christian celebrations, a lot of that was based in stuff that even St. Nicholas goes back to the 4th century. And I just looked him up again today. He was a bishop in Myra in what I think is somewhere in Arabia or something like that. And how the Dutch latched onto him and made him Sinterklaas, I don't know.
And the solstice was also celebrated by the Druids and other pagan Vikings. and called Yule, and the tradition of the Yule log stayed around, and then the decorating with all the evergreens, mistletoe, of that came from those pagan traditions and was just incorporated into Christmas.
Yeah.
One tradition that sounds very pagan in Tudor times was the wassailing piece, where but not just that. The reason that I say it's very pagan is that the people who lived near where apples were grown would go and sing to the trees.
Oh, wow.
As part of that. So I've got to believe that there's a little bit of Celtic or Druid or anything else. So Zenobia, what else? What other holidays would your characters have celebrated?
So the other book I want to talk about is The Queen of Warriors, which is about a Spartan warrior woman who's captured by a Persian warlord about 80 years after Alexander the Great. So it takes place in the remains of his Eastern Empire. And a big part of that, of my story, not a big part, it's like a part of my plot, is that it's Nowruz, the Persian New Year, which is always on the spring equinox. So I read somewhere that it's unlucky to kill. So she's his captive, and she's like, aren't you going to kill me quickly? And he's like, no, I have time. And she's like, don't your people want you to kill me? And he's like, it's unlucky to kill before the new year. So it kind of gives them time to get some things going. Work some stuff out. So like that, the Nowruz celebration happens like off screen, but it's a big part of the story, and also the idea of the new year and rebirth. And she thinks she's going to die, and it's like, what does it mean to die in springtime? And so that's one of the big parts. And then some other holidays in my books have to do with coming of age rites. So yeah.
So those would just have been celebrated when people came of age, or was there like a special season for that?
There were, so I'm writing the prequel to this book right now, and the Spartans had this really crazy coming of age situation at the temple of Artemis or Etheria. I'm sure I'm saying it wrong, but it's the upstanding Artemis, and the boys who were like about to be men would be naked, and they would get whipped by Spartan warriors as they tried to get into the temple to get cheese, like a wheel of cheese. And it was this really intense coming of age ceremony. And the story I've heard or read is that the Artemis used to want a human sacrifice, and that they substituted that by blood being spilled onto the statue. So that's like an intense coming of age ceremony that I think usually happened like in the spring or summer. And then in my other book, Ariadne Unraveled, I have a much nicer coming of age ceremony among the Minoans. So there are these Minoan frescoes that show they're red beaded necklaces, and they have 28 beads. And so some people think that the women used that to count their cycle. So I had this coming of age ceremony scene where it would be like all the girls who had their first menstrual cycle that year would come together with their aunts and their mothers and all their female relatives to kind of talk about what it means and what each bead represents. So it's like, you might be kind of upset at this point in the cycle, on this day, eat honey, like, and talking about it, because I feel like, women knew a lot about their bodies in the past. And I like the idea of like coming together that way with your family and with your community. And so I incorporated that coming of age story for the Minoans, which are much nicer and kinder than the Spartans.
Yeah, Spartans had issues.
How about you, Linda? What other holidays would your characters have celebrated?
Well, in Britain, Easter, of course. They also had May Day, Midsummer Day, All Hallows Eve or Halloween, of course, and Guy Fawkes Day, the day that Guy Fawkes tried to blow up Parliament and failed, thank goodness. And in the US, of course, we had the 4th of July and then Memorial Day, which came about after the Civil War to commemorate the dead of that horrible war.
Now, so does Easter, I'm just thinking about Zenobia's Nowruz, like with the whole New Year's and Easter thing, was that a big thing in your period? I know it was in the Tudor era, so I'm wondering at what point.
I think it still was, and that was another one that was a Christian holiday on top of a pagan holiday. And if I'm not mistaken, the first Easter eggs date back to the Persian Nowruz.
It makes sense. An egg is a big part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think Easter has
A
long
part of it.
been popular.
How about you, Anne? In the
Well,
West?
we also probably had some Hispanic festivals because we had a large Hispanic population. I could find when I was researching Death of the City Marshal, which starts on October 31st, 1870, which was when Marshal Warren was shot. I found no references to Halloween. I found no references to Dia de los Muertos. But I got a funny feeling they were there. I don't know for sure. And I've been kind of looking around, haven't really seen much. As Linda pointed out, 4th of July was a big deal. Very, very big deal. I haven't seen too much on Easter, although that may have been bigger in the Hispanic community and the newspapers weren't recognizing it because they really didn't pay much attention to the Hispanic community. And which may be another reason why the Dia de los Muertos, or the Day of the Dead, was not acknowledged. I mean, that's a fairly big Catholic holiday too. And again, the Hispanics were predominantly Catholic, and so there's that. One other day that they did celebrate that I was a little surprised to find was Thanksgiving. They had already established Thanksgiving by the 1870s.
Wow.
And I had thought, oh, well, it's not there. And then, no, we have the Thanksgiving feast. Oh, okay. So I was a little surprised by that. But yeah, it was again, a lot of the holidays we normally think of. I didn't realize Memorial Day was quite so early. Thank you, Linda. But
I don't know how big it was in California because there wouldn't have been as many.
Actually, the other reason in Los Angeles it might not have been as big a deal is because that may have been more of a Union thing, and there were a lot, and I do mean a lot, of Confederate sympathizers in LA at the time.
That's
in
true.
fact, when Robert E. Lee died in 1870, the ladies of the village got together. We've got to put a memorial up to him. So, which nowadays, of course, would be, but yeah, there were a lot of Confederate sympathizers in LA in the 1870s. So that may have been another reason why it didn't go over as big, or I just haven't really looked at the newspapers in that time.
Yeah. Another thing was that apparently the draft never extended west of the Mississippi because the Union wanted to keep the West loyal, and so there weren't many casualties in Western states.
Yeah,
Northern
there were quite a few. I know there's a graveyard. We live in Altadena, and there's a graveyard near us that has Civil War vets in it.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, they're not people who died during the Civil War. They're people who survived the Civil War and then later died as old men, or old men predominantly. But
or not so old like my ancestors who died fairly young after being wounded in the war.
Yeah. Well, most of the people didn't come out to this end of LA until the 1880s. You got anywhere from 1850s to 1880s in this immediate area. LA had more people initially. El Monte was getting pretty big at the same time, and certain places in the San Gabriel Valley. So
I am fascinated by that. So many of your holidays seem to be secular. instead of religious. And you know, I look back to the Tudor times where they were all religious, or you know, they would hang something on there. But you've been mentioning, you know, Thanksgiving not necessarily religious. I mean, we really have, you can see it in the course of history. Did I get that right? Am I?
No, you're absolutely right. You know, I was kind of surprised that, I mean, it was, you have to understand, 19th century people had a very strong sense of religion. There were a lot of, especially in America, you had a lot of Bible thumpers out there, and that sort of thing. And when people talked about, you know, it's what Maddie does in Death of the Zonjero, which, oops, there it is. Anyway, when she talks, a lot of times it's the loving providence of Jesus, and she talks about Jesus a lot. And if you read, particularly what I do is I read a lot of Louise May Alcott, and there's that same theme that our loving Lord and Savior, and there are all sorts of different images of God. So, you know, it was kind of one of those things that, religion was there. You were expected to go to church, but the holiday was also secularizing at the same time. I mean, I've got this, I don't know, can I share a screen? Would you guys mind if I shared a screen? Let me see if I can do it. Nope, we can't. Okay, that's no big deal.
I just gave you permission. Go ahead.
Okay, we're going to try this again. But, you know, let's see, did I just do that? Or this is the one I want. Here it is. Here's, you know, this is from the Los Angeles Daily Star, 1872, December 18th. We've got a ball right there. We've got the Grand Christmas Ball, and that's in a Jones Hotel in El Monte. This one's going to be on December 31st, but look at this great exhibition of Christmas and New Year's goods. And look at all these goodies and family Bibles and prayer books. That's the first thing up, you know, violins, flutes, and dolls, and all of these goods will be sold cheaper than the cheapest, you know, and this is not the only ad in this newspaper that I found. And as the closer we get to Christmas, the more of those ads are there. So that whole concept of gift giving was really well established at that point.
Linda, did they have ads in the Victorian days?
I didn't actually look that up, but I would imagine they did. And I know Christmas was a big deal. And so I would imagine they did. And certainly there were, the first Christmas cards were printed in 1843, I believe. And there was a printing of about 1,000 if they sold out. And so then that became a big deal. Cards. And the Christmas trees came to England when Queen Victoria married Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg, and he the German tradition. And in where the London Illustrated News showed a picture of the royal family's Christmas tree, and then that craze caught on.
Yeah,
everybody wanted to emulate the royals, of course.
And Laura Ingalls Wilder, I think, mentioned trees at least twice. One of the
probably,
I think there was a tree in Little House in the Big Woods. And there was definitely a tree in fact, it was a community tree in Little House on the Prairie.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's probably
and, I think that's kind of good primary evidence because, frankly, those are her memoirs, better or worse.
That is very true.
A community tree. I'm just imagining like somebody constantly rearranging their neighbors, like how they did it. And every time they go back, they're like, who put my ornaments over here? Like I can just imagine high drama. Although I do like
a lot of gifts on the tree.
Yeah, they did at one time tie a little gift.
Really?
Yeah. When Wilder's describing it, the gifts are coming off the tree for everybody.
And they're small gifts. A lot of them are food and
right.
And so they got bigger, they went under the tree. As the century went on, the gift giving became more elaborate.
Right.
And
you also have to keep in mind, Wilder was not exactly wealthy either.
No,
so we're talking about
in those days, if you got an orange for Christmas, that was a good Christmas.
Yeah.
I love that. Zenobia, I'm wondering about you, coming of age rituals. That sounds like almost like a cross between religious and secular. How does that work?
Well, I actually realized that I left off a lot of other religions that holidays, what other holidays my characters would have celebrated. Because for the Greeks, there were all kinds of holidays related to all the gods had holidays and specific holidays. The Spartans had 3 just for young Apollo. So they were all like very specific, but a coming of age ceremony, usually not in my novel about the Minoans, it's not so much related to Artemis, but it would be for the Greeks for sure, because she was the goddess of young girls. And so there was always a god attached to a ceremony, even if it seemed secular. There was always a god to sacrifice to. And then later, coming of age ceremonies for girls, there was one where they would like kind of give up their dolls to move on to womanhood as well. So there was always that interconnectedness between secular and religious, but it was religious because it was like, I need the gods to approve of this, so that was a big part of all of these different, there were festivals to each god, and in different city-states, there were different festivals, and, some were for everybody, some were for men only, some were for women only, some were for married women only, it was like a way of showing what group you belong to as well.
I love that. I want to get to we haven't even started talking about food yet. That is like, when we think holidays, we think of festive and wonderful food. Linda, would your characters have enjoyed anything special during the holidays?
Oh yeah, there was always a big feast at the holidays. Depended on the wealth of the family and to some extent where they lived. Were available. In the north of England, roast beef was traditional, probably with Yorkshire pudding. And while in London in the south, roast goose was favored. Turkeys were very expensive to start out, but they became cheaper as the century went on. And by the end of the 19th century, the Christmas turkey had taken pride of place in most households. Now, for the very poor, they were lucky if they had rabbit for Christmas. And so on. And there was the Christmas pudding, there were fruitcakes, mince pies. Originally, mince pies meant actual meat, not just raisins and currants and whatnot. And I'm one of those funny people who actually like fruitcake and mince pies, if you can imagine it.
Okay, now we're worried about you. No,
my grandmother was English, so I grew up eating those.
Well, of course, then, yeah.
And the other grandmother was from German heritage, so she always made anise cookies and have Lebkuchen and Pfeffernuss cookies and Brudel, and there's just wonderful foods in all of Europe for Christmas.
So part of that, and because that's like England, I am kind of like interspersing my own knowledge of the Tudor times and the ideas that with the humors, there are certain foods that are seasonal. When you go for the spicy, when you go for the cinnamon and all of that. Zenobia, did you notice spicy? Okay, let me back up and ask, would there have been feasts? And, you can also answer the spices. And
there would definitely have been feasts because a lot of the celebrations would but involve the sacrifice of a cow or a bull. So then they would eat that meat. So I guess there would be barbecue.
Yep.
After you watched live victim get slaughtered, because they would call the sacrificial animal the victim. And then there would always be wine and probably cheese, and bread was pretty common. I've definitely read in my research that pita, the word pita and plate are related. And so they would use the pita for plates. So you could eat the meat from the plate, which was pita bread.
Mhm.
So I don't know about humors. I mean, in Ariadne Unraveled, I talk about Minoan cooking, and I kind of tried to use some different kinds of combinations that we wouldn't normally have, like putting honey on things that we normally think of as savory, coriander or cuttlefish, I can't talk, and beer, and then wine. So, but I mean, because my books take place so long ago, there isn't that same kind of like Christmas goose that we know about from others.
How about you, Anne?
Well,
Would they have
I have to
sacrificed a
admit-
cow or bull in
Well, they probably did, because there was a lot of cattle around, and there was a lot of chicken. And I've been having a really rough time finding out what people were actually eating in LA in the 1870s. I suspect it was a lot of what most people were eating in the Southwest around then. How much of that involved chiles and some of the other stuff that were very popular from the Hispanic traditions, I don't know. And it's just, there's not a lot out there. People didn't tend to write down what they ate. It was just like, because they pretty much ate the same things over and over and over again. There were a lot of steaks out there, lots of stews and stuff like that. It had to have been ratcheted up. I do know that based on some of the newspaper ads, there's European goods being sold, and everybody's all excited about this tin of that or this stuff. One thing that a lot of people may not assume, normally when you think about the Old West, which is pretty much what I'm writing about, a lot of people think whiskey and beer, and God knows in LA there was a buttload of that, because frankly it was a very rough place. A lot of transient men, a lot of saloons, a lot of whorehouses. So there's that. But at the same time, there was also a lot of wine. And a lot of people don't realize that LA was pretty much California's wine country from about the 1850s till around the 1870s. Napa didn't get the start until after that. In fact, we were shipping grapes to them. Take that, Napa.
Well, they took it.
Yeah. So there was a lot of wine. In fact, Maddie is a winemaker. And one of the wines she makes was a wine that was actually unique to Los Angeles, called Angelica. And Angelica is a sherry. It's a sherry. It's made in the sherry style from a Jerez, Spain, that the padres made initially because they needed wine for communion. But it was a fortified wine. So you'd make it and then you'd add some brandy to it, and then it would get all oxidized. And sometimes it tastes pretty good in spite of that. But Maddie makes Angelica, and it's made from a grape called the Mission grape. And in fact, there is, I'm gonna down at Olvera Street, there are 2 vines in the Avila Adobe, which is the oldest structure in Los Angeles, that are still producing grapes. And my husband collects them and makes Angelica from them, which is like really insanely awesome, because those vines have been there at least since the 1850s. We're not sure how long they've been there, but they've been there a long time. And there's a couple other vines on the street too that we've got to start taking care of. But they're Mission grapes. They're the same clone from the big vine at the Mission San Gabriel. So they would have been drinking that. They may even have been drinking champagne. People would import that. So believe it or not, that was available. And but yeah, and you would get all sorts of Turkish taffy and other European goods. They were really big on, if it was really special, it was European.
Yeah.
Never mind that they were independent as hell and didn't listen to the Europeans were spit. If it was hoity-toity, it was high-end, it was European.
Right. Luxury goods of the time.
Yeah, that was it. It really was.
And the Germans who settled Anaheim first came over to grow wines.
Yes,
They
absolutely. The Anaheim colony.
Yeah, they had vineyards there, and then some kind of fungus came along. And
actually, it was Pierce's disease.
It was something some kind of disease.
Yeah, it was Pierce's disease.
And that's when they switched to oranges and strawberries.
Yeah, that was one of the things they did. Yeah, it was Pierce's disease, believe it or not. At least that is what my husband, the wine history expert, says. We've been studying wine history in LA for a long time. So yeah, let's see if I can
history is lovely history. I'm looking though, because I'm thinking about mentioning the whiskey and the harder liquors. I know that they had those in Victorian era. Did they have them in the ancient times, Zenobia, or was it just wine?
It was just wine. But it was much stronger, and they always distilled it with water.
Okay.
So I can't remember when they first, when it's been recorded that they started with hard liquor, with spirits, but they definitely always diluted their wine in the ancient world. And they thought poorly of people who drank their wine straight because it was too much. So yeah, I mean, I don't know the line, but the alcohol content was pretty high, enough that they would need to mix it with water.
Yeah. I'm going back to Linda because I think I assumed that there was hard liquor in the Victorian era, and I might. Oh, okay.
There was.
Oh yes, there was Scotch whiskey and brandy, cognac. French cognac was highly prized.
Yeah.
And during the Napoleonic Wars, it was always black market smuggled in through Cornwall or some of the Channel ports. Yeah. And port wine, which is a fortified wine, was very, very popular among the gentlemen. And drank sherry as an aperitif before dinner. And and then wine at dinner. And people drank ale and gin. Oh my God.
Yeah, I know.
In Victorian England, that was big.
Very big.
Yeah, and here's if you want, can I share screen again?
Sure.
You okay, Janet? I found the ad I was looking for. I thought I had it. Here it is. Caswell and Ellett, new importations of fresh foreign goods. English fancy biscuit, English marmalades, English pie fruits, English wine jellies, guava jellies, Worcestershire sauce, Coleman's mustard, corn flour, oatmeal, extracted coffee, crystallized fruits were big, mushrooms, mackerel in oil, ferment haddocks. And keep in mind, they're fairly close to the ocean, so seafood's not that hard. Genuine Holland gin, as opposed to, English gin. Genuine Scotch whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was around. French brandy, port wine. There were at least 2 or 3 breweries in town, so there was a lot of beer. Bourbon whiskey, which is from Kentucky, so they had that. So yeah, these guys selected for medical and family use.
That's great.
So I always crack up when I read these ads because it's just like, oh my God. And they got a lot of the medical ads for, there are all the things they give you to help you with your erectile dysfunction and a host of other things. Yeah, I know. 19th century and they're talking.
Is that what family use means?
What?
Is that what family use means there?
It could. I don't think so.
I was thinking because the way I use alcohol to deal with my children.
Yeah, well, a lot of us.
I mean, to make me calm down.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're saying. I did the same thing too occasionally. He was a bit of a handful, but
we used to rub whiskey on the gums when the babies were teething.
And I don't doubt that happened back then too. You didn't have that many anesthetics.
Right. And you didn't have the internet to tell you how terrible that was.
True.
You only had your mother or mother-in-law or neighbor or aunt say, you know what you should do to quiet that baby?
It doesn't work though. I didn't say how I knew.
That is great. So we've covered alcohol, we've covered food. How about the other big holiday thing, gifts? How about so tell me about the kinds of gifts your characters would have exchanged, or feel free to give me a gift that you would love to give to your character. And you go first.
Well, I know what
After
Maddie
that
wants.
evil laugh, I figure that.
No, actually, stationary gifts, dolls, again, a lot of the traditional toys, and a lot of them would have been very, very gender defined.
Mm.
You would not have had a boy playing with a doll at all, not even close, no way, no how. And a little girl who wanted a hammer, forget it, not happening. So, but you had a lot of the toys were either miniature tools that their parents would be using.
Mm.
And of course you see all the little wind-up toys and the mechanical stuff. But keep in mind, most people couldn't afford a lot of the really fancy stuff. Especially in Los Angeles, they were wealthy. There were some very wealthy people there, but the vast majority of the people weren't. And even if they were very wealthy, the families were fairly, they didn't have a lot of money and they didn't have a lot of space. It was, LA was a backwater, guys. It started, the population wise, it was starting to grow in the 1870s. Went from roughly 5,000 at the beginning of the decade to roughly 10,000. Well, that's a pretty big jump, but it really exploded in the 1880s and 1890s. And that's when a lot of the real wealth started showing up. So my characters probably would have just had the stuff in that ad that I showed you earlier. There was Christmas stationery. There's another ad just underneath that says, "Oh, we've got Christmas stationery." So, I know what Maddie would like if she'd known it existed, and I'm not sure it did, would be a surgical pump. Because we're just starting, well, surgery has been happening for years, sedated surgery since the 1830s, 1840s. And they knew about ether even before the Civil War. They just probably couldn't get it. That's why we had those horrible stories. But
Surgical equipment. That's what I want. That's on my list for.
Of course, Maddie would want. She's a surgeon.
We want that surgical equipment.
And she's just learned about sterile surgery. I'm not sure when it actually appeared in LA, but I have Maddie leading the cause on that one because, gee, that's a lot more fun.
That would be a good thing to give them. How about you, Zenobia? What are you giving your characters?
So my first thought when you asked this question was socks, because it occurred to me at some point that my characters did not have socks. And that seems really awful to have like really great Persian boots, but no socks. But I think, more significant for them would be antibiotics.
Yeah, antibiotics.
They used honey as an antibiotic ointment, but internal antibiotics, would be amazing for them to have.
Or two.
Have they started with like garlic yet at that point as an antibiotic?
Probably. I mean, they had a lot of medical knowledge. I mean, the ancient Egyptians had a lot of like surgeons and eye doctors and dentists, and like in the Hellenistic age, that kind of information spread very quickly. And I do have like a traveling doctor in in the Queen of Warriors, and they use honey for wounds, but there are some things that even honey can't fix.
There are a lot of things that honey can't fix.
I definitely love that. And especially the idea of socks for us living in Los Angeles. I don't wear a lot of socks, but Linda is writing about people who do wear a lot of socks and
need a lot of socks.
Yeah, because it's cold where my characters live for the most part. Yeah, and in the best present, in my story in the anthology, as I recall, Allison mainly gets hair ribbons for Christmas because her family is down on their luck at the time. Yeah. And so brightly colored hair ribbons are her gift.
Yeah.
What would she have wanted though?
A
whole dress.
Yeah. Well, what she wanted was, well, at this point, I'm not sure what she would have wanted. It's been a while since I wrote it, but she was happy with what she got.
I'm just laughing because back in the Tudor days, the gift rolls, we had a list of everything that the monarch gave and the monarch received, and we have not a lot of them, but two that have come down are Henry VIII right before he married Anne Boleyn and right after he married Anne Boleyn. And right before he married Anne Boleyn, he gave her jewels for her hair and jewels for her fingers and jewels for her this and for that. And after they got married, he gave her plates.
Charming.
So,
yeah, we don't have to romance her anymore. We're good.
But now plates were a really good gift. Were they still as good a gift in the Victorian era as they were for the Tudors?
If it was good china, I would think so,
I
yes.
would think so. Yeah, especially in Los Angeles, where good china probably wasn't that easy to come by.
And you know,
When you think about how far you had, shipping that stuff and the odds of something breaking in that shipment, I would think that would have been pretty special to have real china or good china, because they certainly had plenty of what we call what is the word I'm thinking of, the clay, good clay, but the good pottery ware. They had plenty of that.
Stoneware.
Yeah, they had plenty of stuff like that, but really fine china, yeah, that would be insanely expensive. Partly because of the materials and partly because of shipping, and you'd have to have enough to keep the breakage down. And keep in mind, when you get into Victorian society and you're doing real Victorian society like they would have in Boston, you had huge service. You had forks for everything.
Right.
A different fork for oysters, a different fork for this. I mean, when you think of the 13-course deal and the amount of silverware and all the immense numbers of plates, some of which could have been were in fact gold plated.
Mm-hmm. Another thing people used to do is they would get a plain plate and then hand paint it.
Yeah,
give it as a gift. So the thing that hand painted, and that would have special meaning.
What about China from China? What about China from China? Like, would we get any imports of porcelain from China, or is that not?
Yeah, we probably did, but given the attitudes of people in the 19th century America toward the Chinese, they may not have been so excited about it.
Oh,
and a lot of it at the time was from England and France. They probably the porcelain from China, but then it would have been made and decorated because de Havilland china from France was highly prized, and there were some English ones too.
Yeah, and oh well, go ahead.
That way it's called China.
That's what it was called, China, but it was porcelain. They called it.
Yeah. But was it anyway from China?
Yeah,
and then it changed.
Right. But by way of France and Britain.
Yeah.
A long way
around. Slow boat.
Yep.
We have an interesting question from the audience that I wanted to get to about putting candles on trees. And I'm going to go from like the oldest to the newest to see how we did that. Did people put candles on trees back in ancient times, or was that something that no, you wouldn't do that?
I mean, I'm not aware of any candles on trees in the ancient world, but
I didn't
possibly.
I did not think so. I was wondering if there were like other decorations that would be used.
I mean, there is a Greek ceremony that involves putting ribbons on trees. I think it's I feel like I should know this, but because it's like a new, like it still happens. I think it's around the spring equinox, or maybe it's for the summer solstice, or maybe it's for Easter. Like it's for a specific holiday. People do put ribbons on trees and other plant life, but I don't know of anything like that in the ancient world, and certainly not. I mean, there were no candles, period.
Oh, that helps.
Which makes it harder in my story.
Yeah.
It'd be easy to
That
just
makes-
blow out a candle, but nobody's got a candle.
They've
That
got
makes-
lamps though.
Yeah.
That makes it much harder. Now,
Yeah.
Linda, you already, I think, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, you might have mentioned that there were No, you told us about Victorian Christmas trees. Did they put candles on them?
Yes, and
Okay.
the Christmas tree was a Germanic tradition, and I'm not sure exactly when they started putting the candles on, but certainly by the time of Prince Albert, they were putting candles on the trees.
Um,
A
I-
very dangerous thing to do.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, there were a lot of fires as a result of it. And
Not- really
but
not a
you
good
also have to
idea.
keep in mind, you didn't put your tree up until Christmas Eve.
That's right.
ah,
The reality was with most Christmas decorations, again, this is something that goes back to the Catholic Church with the Advent, which is the season of preparation before Christmas. And it's a penitential season.
Mm.
And some people, and even after the Protestant Reformation, some groups still kind of like gave a passing nod toward it. But the bottom line was you didn't put your tree up until Christmas Eve, and you probably took it down pretty darn quickly. Again, because if there were candles on it, you could get yourself into trouble, but you only lit them for a very short time, things like that. I mean, people were not that stupid, shall we say. They were a little scarier. They didn't worry about things the way we do, admittedly, but they were not stupid. And so, you're not going to have a dried up tree by Christmas Eve. You're going to have this fresh thing that you just brought in. Assuming in Los Angeles, you could get some decent trees because the Tejon, up in Tejon Pass area, there were plenty conifers. And you could get up to the Bent Wilson had a few. And so whether or not they were or not, I'm not seeing any evidence that they're selling trees, but I didn't get quite to the Christmas Eve. So I'll have to look at that again a little more carefully. I'm not promising that's actually true. But no, the reality is you didn't put it up until Christmas Eve. You didn't decorate. We decorate weeks before. They didn't even start decorating until Christmas Eve. They'd keep it up longer because, you'd go through 12th night usually. But that was about it. And sometimes in currently now, Christmas season in the church, Catholic Church, is considered all the way to the Feast of John the Baptist, which is the week after the Epiphany.
so many religious things. Linda, I just want to follow up on, you said it was a Germanic tradition to put the candles on the tree.
Well, the tree itself was a Germanic tradition.
Right. There's a legend that started with Martin Luther was walking home through the fields one night, and there was an incredibly starry night, and he wanted to share this with his family when he got home, and the only way that he could think to do it was to put candles on the tree. So that is, Martin Luther was in the German states at the time.
Wow.
Huh.
I'm going to
Yes.
take us back to food with another audience question about, it's not so much a question, but an observation. Someone read in one of the 49ers diaries that they brought oysters to the camps from San Francisco for their Christmas dinners. And that was considered a terrific holiday meal.
Oh, yeah, it would have been.
So, would that have been, I'm looking at everyone, and Zenobia, you would have had oysters as well. That's one of those meals that probably would have been festive back then, really. Okay, now
I mean, it depends on where you, I mean, I don't really remember seeing oysters in Crete, and in ancient Persia, there wasn't, I mean, there's a lake, but yeah, that's not really, oyster isn't on my menu. Conch,
I'm
maybe.
thinking as soon as I think like Ariadne, Ariadne rather, the Greek islands, I've got to believe that's got to be.
I mean, maybe there were oysters. I just didn't think about that. I mean, there's octopus and clams, conch, and different kinds of seafood and fish. But I don't know about this.
Oysters were definitely in Linda's time.
Oh,
yeah.
big time.
They had made it to there, and
I don't know how many. I know I've seen some references to oysters in the newspapers, so I'm assuming they were around. Keep in mind, I'm trying to remember, abalone would have probably been around too, because keep in mind, that's native to our area. And so whether or not they had introduced the oyster species into our oceans at that time, I don't know. And keep in mind, Victorians were very much prone to doing that. One of the reasons we have problems, some of the problems we do is that, well, we'll just plant this here, boom,
Right.
and it's like, wait a minute, that really doesn't belong there.
Especially in the Parkway.
Yeah.
That Morton Bay fig tree with the roots that are like, the sidewalk is coming up. You're like, that was a bad call.
That was not a good call, guys. But yeah, and kudzu and stuff like that. So it, I saw oysters would have been a big deal, and they certainly would have been quite prized, And keep in mind, the miners that she's referring to, they were not rich.
Right. They weren't.
And I've read, I don't know for certain, and I don't know how long this lasted, lobster was considered pretty much poor man's food for a very long time.
Oh yeah, there was in Maine, they used to feed it to the prisoners in the penitentiary, and then finally it was considered cruel and unusual punishment, and they passed a law that they could only get lobster twice a week.
That is wonderful. I see that Farima has come back, and I am looking at the clock, and we are, coming to the end of this fun. I don't want to, Farima, I'm turning it over to you.
Okay, thank you all so much. This was such a lively and festive discussion. I know, thank you so much for answering all the questions in the chat. I welcome everyone to join us for future programs. Hopefully we could work on our calendar for spring coming soon. And I just have a reminder that we do have a Books and Brews program going on in Santa Clarita next Tuesday at Pocock Brewery. If anyone is local, we invite you to join us. It's at 7 p.m. And the book selection this month is I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. I also invite you to check out our calendar of events at santaclaritalibrary.com/events for more upcoming programs. Thank you all for spending your evening with us. This was delightful.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Oh, and you got, Oh, and if anybody wants to come to my website, AnneLouiseBannon.com, I'd really love it if you sign up for my newsletter. In fact, all of us who have newsletters would really love it if you did. And check out Janet's site. She's got all sorts of great Tudor stuff on there. Maybe some Porter stuff too. Okay, nice.
That's great.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.